Today on Ask a Shrink, let's examine the false self. Hang on. Most of you have probably heard the term the false self, and that we know we operate from the false self for much of our life depending on how we were raised. That has a lot to do with it. Now let's ask ourselves, why would we need to begin creating a false self when we were raised? What could possibly be the reason or reasons for that? Well, 90% of it ties into our parents. It's how we were raised or not raised by our mother or father or caretaker or whoever raised us. Now, raised implies that the parent was right there traumatizing the child on some level. The child could be a victim of some type of abuse, or if they weren't necessarily abused, what was role modeled, what they saw on an ongoing basis was dysfunctional. It was emotionally destructive somehow. By not being raised, that's equally important. It has to do with perhaps being abandoned, left alone, a child who's a victim of neglect. And neglect is a tough one. It often gets overlooked in how traumatic it is. But think about the messages a child of neglect gets. It gets the message that they don't really matter. They don't count for anything. Talk about feeling a serious inferiority complex. So it all has to do with how we were raised or not raised. In either case, we feel that we are not good enough. There's something wrong with us. I must have contributed to the fact that I was raised in a dysfunctional way. There's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I wasn't wanted, or I wasn't loved, or I was told I was stupid, or I was told I would never amount to anything, or I was emotionally abused, or I was hit, or I was sexually violated, or I was bullied, or I was ignored, I was left alone all day. The list can go on, and it all contributes to why children need to create a false self. How can you live with some of the things I just mentioned right there? When you're a little kid, you don't have the ego strength, the ability to work through that, to process your feelings about all those things I just mentioned. So you have no choice when you're small but to create an artificial sense of self. It's the mask that we put on for all to see. It's the facade, the persona we need to create and put on, and it's there to protect us as we go through childhood from any additional stress or shock or trauma of some sort. It needs to be there, but we don't want to carry it around our whole life, right? That's when it can become very problematic. It's problematic enough as a child because the child is not safe to be themselves. They're not valued for who they really are, and they know that. So then we have it as a coping mechanism as a child, but sometimes people carry that with them their whole life. And then it continues to affect us all through our 20s, 30s, and up to our 80s sometimes. So it's important to get in touch and realize and observe if we have a false self. Don't beat yourself up about it. It's just was there to protect you, but now perhaps you're working through those issues as an adult, which means the false self can begin to just deteriorate. It can diminish. The irony of all this is the child feels on some level they know intuitively they can't be their real self. And so ironically, in order to get love, in order to comply, so to speak, they create the artificial self. And then having the artificial self allows them to at least begin to feel some feelings. They fit in on some level. They seem to be loved. The more artificial they are, they seem to be more loved for that by their mother or father. So might as well just create the false self and just go with it. And then it gets reinforced and it gets stronger perhaps. And one of the ways it gets reinforced is as we get older and we're in school and we get jobs and so on, we often have to put on a mask with our employers or with our teachers. There's many ways we continue with the mask, and it seems so normal. But all along, there's somebody inside, the real you, the inner child, just wanting to come out and be loved and respected for who they really are. And when we can't love and respect ourselves for who we really are, we're probably going to have symptoms in terms of self-loathing, very self-critical. Then that can turn into anger, self-hatred, lots of repressed feelings because the feelings are too intense to feel. They're so uncomfortable. Which then leads to the next stage, which is you have to cover up those feelings somehow. They're so uncomfortable, which leads to alcoholism, drug abuse, cutting, eating disorders, panic attacks, and on and on and on it goes. There is a bit of a fork in the road as we develop in terms of our ego development. If we develop a smaller ego, let's say, that's going to be when an ego turns more inward. Like, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I want to hide, I'm not good enough. The ego becomes more of a wallflower, so to speak. Or if we go the other way in the fork of the road, it can turn into a huge ego, which that's all about the same thing. It's all about hiding who we really are. But the huge ego is all about the huff and puff and putting on, and you're right about everything, and you want people to see you because you feel so empty inside, and you're aggressive, maybe even narcissistic. So whether it's a small ego or a big ego, it's still a way to hide. What's healthier as we get to know ourselves more and see the fact that we have a mask on is realize we can have what may be termed a quiet ego. So we all have an ego to some degree, of course, but a quiet ego is more about being the observer, not being so judgmental, not jumping to conclusions, not having to hide or put on, have healthy boundaries with others, less need to protect ourselves. That's the more quiet ego. For those of you who are perhaps spiritual, in Buddhism, say for example, it can be called no ego. Some people strive towards no ego, which can also be called emptiness. With the quiet ego, we're not looking for necessarily any kind of external validation. It's nice if people tend to like us or praise us or something, but it's not necessary. It doesn't form the view of who we are. We want to form the view of who we are from in here, our authentic self, which can take a while to get in touch with, especially if we've been abused as a child, if we're a victim of lots of trauma. But it can be done. We can get to know ourselves, to look at ourselves, to understand ourselves very deeply. A lot of this great work can happen in therapy, but also with other ways too, such as with spiritual practice. Once we're looking more internally for validation versus externally, then we begin to feel some real peace and sense of satisfaction, and we're more comfortable in our own skin. So keep in mind, if you're struggling with this in your life, you created that artificial self as a way to survive a dysfunctional, traumatic childhood. Don't blame yourself. That was simply a defense mechanism, but you don't want to carry it through your whole life. That's when we can struggle with being intimate, having a loving relationship, being vulnerable, especially with our partner if you want to get married someday, having close relationships with friends, and so on. We have to be able to show vulnerability if we want a meaningful, true, authentic relationship with somebody else. And also with ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves about who we really are and not push away the things we think should go away, such as uncomfortable feelings. Just let them be there, feel them, work through them. And in doing that, we begin to take off that mask and be more of our authentic self. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. Please leave them in the comments below. Please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.